This is your host, Brendan, and you're listening to the Ordinary to Ultra podcast. Each episode, I bring in an ultra runner and ask them about their journey to their first ultramarathon, or their first time running a new ultra distance. We'll dive into why they started running in the first place, why they decided to run an ultra, the obstacles they encountered, and what it took to get to the finish line and beyond.
I come back at the second loop and I same thing to him again. I said, "Hey, I'm done. Like I was just not going well for me." And he's like, "No, you're not." He's like, I did not come all this way. What do you need? Let's get you and he gets me out. I go, "Dude, I don't even think I'm going to make the cutoff." He's like, "That's okay." He goes, "If they pull you from the course, that's a whole different story than you quitting on yourself. Now we'll just go walk." He goes, "Let's just go hike." And we started hiking. And I'll be honest, this is where you've probably seen some funny memes online. We're clocking 15 and a half minute miles. We are not setting any land speed records. And he's just saying, it's getting dark, night's coming in. He's like, "It's fine. We're going to keep going." And this is my second 100K. So this is funny. Earlier, I told you the second one's easier.
Yeah.
Not always.
This one.
No. And so 18-mile loop with two aid stations, one at mile 6, one at mile 12, and then you come back to the finish. He's like, "Look, we're just going aid station. We just got 6 miles to go to the next aid station. We'll take it smooth. Let's take it easy, whatever pace you want." We jogged a little bit, but mostly it was pretty easy. And I got to a point where I'm like, I'm going to finish the cutoff. It was 19 hours was the cutoff for the race. I got to a point, my spirits started to get lifted where I'm like, all right, I'm going to make the race cutoff. Yeah. And then it got to a point where I was like, the Western States cutoff was 17 hours. It was 2 hours faster than the race cutoff. Okay. Then I got like the last 6 miles. I started to get to this place where I'm like, oh, wow, I could possibly make the cutoff for Western States qualifying.
Hello, fellow ultra runners and those soon to be. This is your host, Brendan. You started this episode listening to an excerpt of my interview with Mike DiGiovanni. Mike started running several years ago as a tool to help himself become sober and has since really fallen in love with running and become an ultra runner. He's run 2 100Ks, 3 50-milers, 5 50Ks, and 4 marathons in total. He loves to talk about how running and sobriety has changed his personal and professional life. And after this episode, if you want to get more of his story, you'll have to make sure to follow him on his social media platforms. He's super active on LinkedIn and also on TikTok and Instagram and Strava. Mike is 53 years young. He was born in New York, raised in southern Florida, but currently lives in Southern California near Newport. He has a wife and 2 kids that are 15 and 17 years old, and he is the only runner in the family. That can be hard. He is the VP of purchasing for a home builder, and he also has his own clients and does his own things with running and sobriety. So again, check out his social media platforms to see what he is doing. All right, that's enough background on Mike. Let's get into the show. Hey, Mike, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here today, man.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate this. It's an honor.
Well, thank you. And super excited to chat with you more today about your story. Had a good time catching up with you just now and excited to dive into everything. I'm just curious before we get going, have you done any fun runs lately or any fun adventures? I'm curious.
No real fun runs. And honestly, right now I'm rehabbing a little bit of a kind of ankle discomfort that I have. So I would say, I went and ran with my group that I haven't been running with lately. We just did kind of a casual run. I had a very intense running season, 2023, and we talked about that, but I did 9 races this year, 7 of which were ultramarathon distance or longer. Ooh. So right now I'm actually kind of enjoying the calm and the peace. And I'm looking for, locally here, we have a little beach half marathon that I'm going to do. I think this will be my 4th or 5th year that I've been doing it. And so I'm looking forward to that as far as fun run goes.
Okay. Yeah, what does recovery look like for you? You've got this ankle injury. Like, I think maybe some of us newer folks might think, oh well, if you hurt yourself, maybe you're out of it for a while and you just kind of don't run. But what does that look like for you as an avid ultra runner? Like, you still
Yeah,
running?
yeah. So and let's caveat, there's two kinds of recoveries, right? Like even if you're not
Hmm.
injured, which I hate the
True.
injury word, like I'm experiencing some pain and some serious discomfort. I'm trying to keep it from becoming an injury. It's actually
Okay.
I
Okay.
have a I have a little tendonitis right now, but I
Okay.
feel it and I know if I keep pushing it that it could become an injury. So
Okay.
when I have that right now, what I'm doing, I normally run 4 or 5 days a week, depending upon what race I'm running for, the distance, and where I'm at in the training block. But right now I'm taking it easy. I just finished my last race of the season was on December 2nd. That was the Ray Miller 50 mile. And so right now I'm just running about 2 days a week, call it like, 8 to 14 miles instead of that 4 to 5. And I'm going to kind of hold with that for the month. And that'll give me 2 to 3 weeks to kind of ease up on the running
Hmm.
before I kind of get ready to get back into next year because we got some big things on the horizon for 2024. So just
Okay.
giving the ankle a little bit of love.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for expounding on that. That I imagine is frustrating. Have you had to push through this tendonitis for some of your more recent races?
Yeah, in particular that last one, December 2nd, and that was a
Okay.
big important one for me because as we mentioned when we were talking earlier, so KH Race is a really good friend of mine, Kira Henninger. She runs a bunch of races, and I volunteer for a lot of her races, and I'm trying to get through the cycle where I've run every one of hers. And the Ray Miller, it's a very iconic race here in Southern California, and it was coming up, and I wanted to show up and do well, and the ankle was bothering me kind of for I'd say 4 to 6 weeks leading up to that. I was hoping a lot of times when you run long distances, you'll get kind of creaks and cracks and whatnot, but usually they'll move around. They just kind of work their way. They'll be in the knee and then they move around, and you just kind of, and this one just kind of kept sticking and sticking, and so I had to push through it in the Ray Miller. What I have found is once I get running, with this particular injury and a lot of my injuries or sort of discomforts, once the
Yeah.
body gets warmed up and I'm in race mode, or even training mode, if I'm out for a 12 mile, 14 mile training run, once the body gets up and warmed up 2, 3, 4 miles in, everything seems to sort of settle out. And then when I finish later on, or the next day, or later on, an hour or two after the race, or the next day, if it'll come back. And so that's kind of what I was pushed last one, and thankfully it held up. And I did all right for my age, as we talked about, earlier. Like at my age, it's not about I'm competitive, so I like to compete against myself. But it held up pretty well.
That's up. Okay. Nice. It's interesting you mentioned tendonitis too. I when I first started running, I had no idea what was happening to me, but I was totally experiencing tendonitis. I would get out for a mile run, or yeah, and towards the end of that mile, my ankles would be killing me and my shins, and I was like, "What is happening? Why am I? This isn't even. It's not that long, you know. It's just a mile, and I wasn't like pushing or anything, just a jog." But yeah, if any of y'all listening are experiencing pain in your ankles, and yeah, those lower legs, it could be tendonitis. Yeah, and I've also
Yeah,
found that when I push past the first few miles, that it goes away. It's interesting.
yeah.
Like it just warms up. Like, is that how that works?
Yeah, and I think that's common. And so what I would say to people, there's,
Yeah.
don't be fooled by thinking that you can continue to do that. So if you're
Okay.
experiencing that, there's two things that, it's when you're running, you're not warmed up, and so it hurts at the beginning. And then once your body starts to warm up, the muscles loosen up, things starts to stretch out, and that's why when it's not an injury, let's say, why it tends to go away after a little while. So, but my recommendation, or what I would say, what I do, I'm not a doctor or a physical therapist, and I did not say it at Holiday
Disclaimer.
Inn Express last night. But what I would say is the two things to help with that. to avoid them and to work out of them is strength training, obviously, and stretching. I'm not a big strength, person. And, it's just, I'm not a gym guy. I'm not a weight guy. So I struggle with that. In all honesty, I just like to run. A side note, we can talk about another time, but matter of fact, I have a running coach. And the whole reason I picked my running coach was because in an article that I read about him in Ultra Running Magazine, it said, what else do you like to do other than running for training? And he said, nothing. I just like to run. And I immediately, I was on the hook looking for a coach, and I emailed the company. It was Sundog Running. And I immediately hit them up, and I was like, hey, is Eric Sensman available to coach? Because if he is, I want him to be my coach. But stretching is the one thing I would tell everybody, and I didn't for a long time, but I do now. You should have no excuse for stretching, because if you can really just muster up 5 to 10 minutes, literally, I'm telling you, 5 to 10 minutes of stretching before your runs and before every run. If you find a simple stretching routine that works those areas that you tend to have those feelings or those creaks and cracks with, you will help avoid, because what you're doing is you're working that muscle ahead of time. And I'm not talking not aggressive stretching, just sort of, and I've got my routine that I do that literally takes a little bit of time. And it's funny that you mentioned, your tendonitis. It is usually, I think, what a lot of people get beyond shin splints or plantar fasciitis is the tendons. It's typically your tendons. And often, that's right, those are all around your joints. Often what happens is I find that people aren't stretching and activating the proper muscles. And that was a big problem for me. I was very quad dominant in the first couple of years I ran. So my quads were doing all the work. And a lot of people, maybe some of your listeners, beginner, would go, well, yeah, that's right. That's your biggest muscle, right? What you don't, the glute is one of the strongest muscles in your body. And you would be surprised how many people don't use their glutes when they're running. They're just using quads. And this is a term physical therapists, you're quad dominant. And if you're not in balance and you're not getting the backs and those hamstrings, and particularly the glutes, fired up before you start running, you'll start to pull joints in not natural ways that, there's a great book, if you haven't read it, called, I think it's by Tom Foreman, called My Year of Running Dangerously. It's a great book. If you haven't got it, you should get it. It's hilarious. And he described it this way. This is what I'd say to people. If you're training for the 5K, the 10K turkey trot or something, or even one half marathon a year, you can deal with just about any kind of little discomfort, because it really won't lead to something major. You're training for marathons, you're training for ultra marathons, you're going to be doing so much miles that those little inconveniences or whatnot, they're going to build. If you don't take care of them, they're going to hinder your long-term running career. So, and that's what got me to stretch. I didn't like to stretch, but then I realized I like running so much, I better do some maintenance on the machine.
Dang. Thank you so much. This is great advice. And I just wanted to say I'm the same. I love running, and I have my wife. She's a personal trainer. One of my best friends, personal trainer. They're always trying to get me to the gym. I'm like, guys, but an hour working out at the gym is an hour I could be hitting the trails. I need to do it though.
So my advice to you is one, I tell your listeners is come up with a stretching program that works for you. Look, if you've got a friend who's a personal trainer and or a PT, or just go to YouTube and just Google running stretches. You'll find some. Do running yoga. There's plenty of yoga by Adrienne. She's got tons of free videos on YouTube you can check, and they're specific to stretching. And so I would say do those. And then for you, and look, I need this advice too. So I'm telling myself as well as I'm telling you, is it doesn't take much more than one of those adjustable 25-pound dumbbell sets, where you can kind of click lock them or whatever. Yeah. And you're just doing a certain round of just knee bends or, kind of step. You can do it at home and once again, that's probably going to take you more 15 to 30 minutes. And my advice to you to give to your wife would be to say, hey, can you give me something I can do in 15 to 20 minutes at home? And at least that'll get you started. And that's what I would tell people from a strength training perspective. Yeah. Don't try to go to the gym and spend an hour. Just do something you can do at home, even if it's body weight stuff, and spend 10 to 20 minutes, something manageable. Because if you go to the gym once and you kind of push yourself through 50 minutes and it's miserable, you don't like it, you won't go back. But if you're doing if you're doing 15 or 20 minutes at home and you're like, that's not too bad, you're more likely to do it again for the long-term benefits of your running.
Preach,
Because that's
Mike.
the whole goal, like just to run longer.
Yeah, that exactly. Yeah. And it's true, especially in these upper distances. I've been reading books and talking to other longtime ultra runners like you. And yeah, I'm hearing strength training is helpful and it will help you go farther, especially looking at these longer distances. So thank you. Great advice.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is gold for our listeners here. Okay.
So that's one thing. So I would
now.
tell people is
Okay.
if your glutes are tired or sore when you're done running or the day after, you're doing something right. Like I tell everybody that I meet about that. Like I'm like, if your glutes and so you should also look for things like there's some things you can do to activate your glutes before you run, which is huge as well too. So stretch, activate your glutes, and try to work in a little strength, and you'll run longer and run further.
Love it. All right, Mike. So I'd like to go back in time and talk about why and when you first got into running.
Sure. I was one of those guys who hated running. Those people who say like they'd never run, didn't run in high school, middle school, college, no track, no cross country. But I struggled with drug and alcohol addiction for the better part of my life for a whole bunch of other reasons that we'll save for another podcast. But let's just say childhood issues and along the way in that window, I was sort of struggling to sort of find my way back to sobriety. I'd had different bouts of being sober for 7 years, and then I was in this window of time where I wasn't. And I'm almost sober, almost 6 years. I'm coming up with my 6-year birthday pretty soon here, and I was looking to get back to that healthy lifestyle. And I found a group in Denver called the Phoenix, and they were more focused on rock climbing, but they had a couple guys that had a little running group, and they would run a couple times a week. One time was kind of dirt pack, bike trails. And then another time, one time a week was actually trail running. And so I did that for a little bit and then still had my struggles with, and it's hard to be, I don't see how runners can drink at all, like let alone ultra runners, but some of them do. It just doesn't work for me. And so I relocated to California. I got sober. And after about a year getting sober, I decided it's time to do something physical, move my body, get myself healthy that I felt would help me stay sober. And I remember that I enjoyed running, and I remembered being a part of the Phoenix group. And I said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to start running. And I started running. I said, I'm going to sign up for a race because I figure if I have a goal, this will help. And I signed up for, so this is in June of 2019, right before COVID, right? And I signed up for the Long Beach Half Marathon. I found a training program online, and about 4 or 5 weeks into it, I was bored. And so I went back online. I found a marathon training program, and I figured out what week kind of lined up with the week I was at to slide from the half marathon training program on the spreadsheet to the full. Looked at the window of time, looked at the date of the half marathon I had signed up for, and was like, all right, got online. I upped my reservation from a half marathon to a full. And in October of 2019, I ran my first marathon, the Long Beach Marathon, which is a flat and fast, they call it. Mine was not very fast. It was grueling. I hit that proverbial, that wall they talk about at like 18 to 20. And then mile 22 to 26 were just brutal. I thought for about 24 to 36 hours, I thought I'll never do that again. And then I was signing up for my next one shortly after that window. And I've been running ever since then, and so it's just something that I've just grown to love.
It's so funny. And then you gave in and signed up for another one. How many times have you heard that from other runners?
Oh my God. We all talk about it like after that first one, and you're going to find this too, like the ultra running joke too, is like, you'll do one and then you're like, oh God, like, especially when you're going to like the next distance, right? You'll do one. Like I'm trying to think like how many marathons I did. I've done I've done 4 official marathons, like just straight up 26-2 marathons, road marathons. And I would say it was only after the first marathon that I said I'll never do that again. But I will say there were times after certain ultra distances where I'm like, I don't think I want to do that again. And actually, it was funny. It was after my first 50 miler, which was September of last year, that I kind of thought, you know what, I think I'm just going to give up on the 100-mile dream and just stick to 50Ks. We talked about that earlier before we got on the record.
Yeah.
I like 50Ks. They're not that time consuming, relatively speaking, to train for.
Yeah.
And compared to a 50-mile, because when I did the 50, that was the first time that I really had to get into the 5-day-a-week training.
50-miler.
Yeah. And it's funny, earlier we were talking about the recovery. It's like sort of the recovery, I think, as you go up in distance. Anybody talk about like the base, you kind of like, you just start raising your base. And so I believe that as you start getting to the higher distances, the first and or second time you do each of those, they're really hard, and the recovery is kind of not arduous, but longer. And so after each level up in distance, you've really got to ask yourself, do I want to keep going? And my advice to people on that thing would be is one of two things. Is one, understand whatever it is. If it's a 50K and you want to go to a 50-miler, the training is going to be more intense. Like, it's going to take more time. If it's a 50-miler and you want to go to 100K, that's not a massive jump, right? Because you're going from 50 miles to 62. It sounds like a lot, earlier on in the stage, but the big jumps really are when you go from a 50K 31 miles to 50 miles. It's 19 miles, and and obviously everybody knows trail marathons kind of like they vary a little bit, and sometimes I've run some 55Ks and I've seen 60s here, but generally speaking, you go marathon 50K is 30 miles, the next, or 31, and then the next one's 50. That 19 miles, that's a big jump, like, right? That's a huge increment. But then when you go from 50 to the 100K of 62, it's a lot, but relatively, right? Like, relatively speaking, it's 12 miles compared to the last jump was 19. And then comes the daddy, right? Like the 100-miler, which now you're going from 62 to 100 miles, and you're like, oh man. So, and just the recovery seems to get a little longer with each one. And I think that, after each one, you're going to a lot of people have that, like, oh, I don't think I want to do that again. And I would say to them, it's just like the last plateau, you hit, or the last level, give it a day or two, maybe even a week. Think about it. And, if you do one more, I feel like at that distance, that second one is always, to me, a lot easier, just overall, because you're learning more about the training process to get to that distance. You're learning more about the fueling and how your body is going to react, whether it's, you do a 50K and it's, takes you 6 or 7 hours. And then you go to a 50-miler. Now it takes you, 13 or 14 hours. It's a huge difference. That first time it's a learning experience in and of itself. You do the next one, and I feel like you kind of start to dial some things in. You're getting a little bit better at it. So, but yeah, it's a lot of people do say that, particularly after the marathon. I've heard that a lot. Like, oh, I'll never do that again. And then many of them are like, signed up for a marathon within a week, so.
And
but,
we do
and
that.
I'm hooked now.
We do that because why? What do we love about it? That we love something about it more than we hated the pain, right?
Yeah. And I like it. And right now I try to translate a lot of like what I've learned from training for running to life and business and entrepreneurship and all of that. And, we've all heard it, right? Like, love the journey, love the journey, not the destination. And I know it's a little cliche, but it ultimately is true. I think there's one of my more favorite sayings on that is, the person who loves walking will go much further than the person who's just trying to get, 100 miles or whatnot. Because if you're just trying to get to 100 miles, like, and you don't love walking, it's going to be really long. So I've grown to love that process. And I had a mountain biking coach when I lived in Denver who used to talk about, he said, we sign up for races just so we train. And he used to try to preach to us, and I don't even think he realized, I think he was ahead of himself in years. What he was essentially saying is, we don't sign up for the race to go race. We sign up for the race so that we do all of this other stuff leading up to the race, which is the training. And for me, I find a lot of beauty and discipline in my life. I have, ADD tendencies. I don't know that I really am ADD, but like I've got a lot of anxiety, which, kind of manifests in sort of having a hard time sticking to one thing versus another. And so I just like the discipline and the ritual of putting a training plan together and mapping it out and going in. And then the goal does become, like, I really look at it as like, I put the goal out there, and then I love building that map to what does that look like to get there, and then just going and executing on it. And I've really enjoyed, to be honest, I've really enjoyed having a coach too, because I don't have to think about it then. Like, I know he's going to tell me what I got to do for the next 2 weeks. I know what days we work certain things out. Like, I run Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. And so I just have a plan. I know when I block my time, and I look at the Google sheet that we share. Oh, that's what I'm doing for the next 2 weeks. And, and he watches what I'm doing and, builds on that. That journey for me is what it's about. And I think it translates to so many things beyond running. Just like the sobriety for me, it's a journey. Like, if, I've translated that not into, people say, like, there's no destination of sobriety. It's not like like if I'm sober for 5 years, look, I proved that. Like, I was sober 7 years, and then I stopped my sobriety and started drinking again. And I went into a bigger pit than I was ever in before. So if you think about it, like, almost from that perspective, for me, there's no destination with sobriety, right? I mean, like, the ultimate destination would be like, I just stay sober till I die. And that can kind of be a little awkward to think about it in that terms, but it's just like, but it's the journey then for me. Like, I'm on a journey today of not drinking, and I'm on a journey today of, like, thinking, what's my next race look like? When is that? So that I can continue this journey. And that's the beauty to me, also about trail running. Like, most ultra marathons are on trails. There are plenty of track ones or whatnot, but no two races are the same. Like, absolutely no two races are the same. I don't care if you run the same exact race. It's a different day, and the weather is different, and so in the elevation, like, you just can't systematize how that race is going to work out, like, on that. And you're on single track, so it's like, we got a lot of these races, like that Ray Miller one I did most recently. They purposely, a lot of these runs where you're going to hit single track fast, they'll start you like a quarter or a third of a mile back from where the single track, just to let the clog of, like, the 30 or 100, whatever it is, 100 people sort of work themselves out a little bit. Yep. But you never know. I've had times where I'm like, I'm just dropping into my pace, and I've gotten much more mature about my pacing in the last 6 months than I used to be. Go out too fast. I settle into my pace, and I feel like I'm good. And then all of a sudden I find myself behind somebody who's slowing down because they went out a little too hot. Now they're slowing down. So you just never know. Every single day, every race is different. So it's really the journey to show up that day and do your best is, for me, what it's all about.
Ooh, wisdom.
Yeah.
I'm like,
some people, my good friend,
that was beautiful.
My good friend Patrick calls it brute force and ignorance. That's what he says ultra running is. Not wisdom. He's just brute force and ignorance. So
that is one take.
And that's just for race day, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, there are some days, and I've had a couple of bad races, where I had one early this year where I wanted to quit. My first race, I really wanted to quit, and just very grateful I didn't. And I didn't because of my support and my friends, were like, no, you're not done yet. So,
Mike, maybe talk to me a little bit about that. Like, for me, for example, I don't have a ton of running friends yet, but that's building, and that's really exciting. But what does support look like in a race? Like, let's say someone's preparing for their first 50K or maybe 50 miler. Those are common first ultra distances. What does support look like for those people? Is it usually just people at the finish line, or are there often people at that they know that are at the aid stations there to cheer them on? And how do you get that together? Like, who do those people consist of too? Like, I'm curious.
Yeah. So first off, we'll go back to the journey. First of all, I think there's so much more support needed leading up to the race, right? Like it's
Okay,
your wife and your family, right? Like to be
true.
supportive of the training that you're going to do. And sometimes that support is just being, emotionally and, hey, yeah, go do this, and you're working out schedules with when your wife goes to the gym or when your partner goes to the gym and when you do your thing, right? And so that is the hugest. I mean, like if you have that, like, hey, I'm just willing to work out that scheduling piece of things with you, that's where it all starts. I think then when you talk about like on race day, what it does boil down to is, and most of the 50Ks that I've run, they're sort of limited where other people can support you. Like you can't typically have a pacer in most 50Ks, not to say that none do, but most of the ones I run. But typically when you get, say, like to the 50 miles and the 100K, you'll have an option for a pacer. So that's kind of support that you can have, and they can pick you up at designated spots approved by the race director.
Mm.
But I would say also, even on your 50Ks, you can have in the aid station, they'll usually tell you, like when you're signing up, you'll see which ones have crew access. So typically, think about this, like, and my hat's off to every race director in the country, like in the world, like, because what they do to figure these out, map them out, and logistically put them together. I volunteered a ton, so I know what it takes, but typically, you're trying to space out these aid stations in a certain window of time. And they're usually, like I would say, you're trying to have an aid station everywhere in kind of the 6 to 10 mile-ish range every, kind of. So you're trying to make these races where, they'll pass by, let's say, like a campground, which typically then by a campground, there's usually a parking lot somewhere. So it makes it kind of reasonable for the volunteers to get in and get access to that trail. And so typically if you have friends who want to come watch you or support you, they can start with you at the beginning and they can understand your pacing and they can go to some of these places where they'll say there's crew access. I typically, when I volunteer, I'm typically the guy who gets asked to hoof into that one or two aid stations where there is no crew access, because there is no
Mm-hmm.
here's a 20-mile stretch or whatever it may be, or there's a 12-mile stretch and we can't get any road access. So you can have friends that do that. What I would say to this is, if you're thinking about supporting or being their race day support for somebody, and this is a little bit more for those thinking of supporting, as well
Yeah.
as if you're gonna run and you're gonna ask somebody to support you. Let's say this. Probably the average time for a 50K on a typical, you're in Utah, right? Like, so
Yeah.
you got elevation.
Yeah.
You're probably looking at, let's call it 7 hours, and I'm a little faster than that. There's people a little slower than that, but everybody's got their pace. But let's just say it's 7 hours. So you're going to leave that start line and you're not coming back for 7 hours. So if I go and there's 2 spots, let's say, that I can see you, if I'm going to ask somebody to be a part of that and be that sort of moral support, I want to see, Jimmy said he's going to come and support me, or my wife or my partner. So they're going to see me off the finish line. First off, you're probably going to be there very early in the morning. You're going to be there at
Yeah.
5, 6, or 7 in the morning at the start time. You're going to go drive to some spot to get access to see me, maybe give me a high five. I'm going to come in and out in probably 2 to 5 minutes, and then I'm gone. You might have on a 50K, you might have 2 spots maybe on a 50K where they can see you and then come back to the finish. So in 7 hours, what you're going to get is the 20 or 30 minutes before the start. You're going to get 5 minutes at one spot, 5 minutes at another. If you time it right too, because like I've had times where like you're ahead of the people who are going to come meet you, or I'm coming to support somebody and they're just running hot.
Yeah.
And sometimes you show up to meet them, you might be sitting there for an hour waiting them to come in, because maybe that 7 hours is not the best day. It's a hot day. And it turns out that all of a sudden, well, now, you know what? It's going to be a 9-hour day. And so you might wait. So from a support perspective, like I said, I think a lot of it is the front end emotional support for our family unit to be supportive of that journey, because it's going to take time and effort. And then on race day, I just tell people is like, look, be thoughtful if you really want to do it. And my advice would be, unless you're gung-ho, and you got to both be honest with each other, are you cool with spending your whole day and getting to see me maybe a total of half hour before the race, 5 minutes, and then after the race when I could be like a zombie, right? If you're cool with that, all right, let's go. If you're my ride or die buddy, like let's go. But I would also maybe say, you know what? If you're not, come to the finish line, and tell them, hey, you could chill out. There's always people hanging out at the finish line. So it's fun. So even if you're having one of those 7, 8 or 9 hour days and they show up 6 hours after start, there's always lots of fun around the finish line. There's crew and other people waiting there. So if they're there and they're waiting for a couple hours for you to come in, and then who doesn't like to see their friend come across the finish line, finishing like their current longest distance, so that's something to think about. When you get into the longer races, though, you get to the 100Ks, it can almost start to become essential. There are diehard, like no crew, people pride themselves on that, like no crew, no pacers, all that at their total solos. I did that up until I got to my second 100K and I asked a buddy to pace me. You get to 100K, 100 miles, and it starts to get to that place where, you probably want to think about it. I mean, unless you're a solo runner and you just want to be alone for 12, 16, 18 hours,
24.
Then it becomes kind of key and helpful to, have people there. And then at that point, you're familiar, like drop bags, like as you get to these longer races, you can also pack a little like care package for yourself and they'll take it to a certain aid station. If those are crew accessible, which the drop bag stations usually are, then, maybe your friends or your buddy, meet you there. And then it's great to like have, and you could be on death's door in some of these things. And you're like, hey, could you get that ketone? I got a little, ketone IQ in my drop bag. Can you grab that, crack it open for even that little bit of help?
Yeah.
Oh, can you put some of my electrolytes in my bladder for me and fill my bladder up? Because you're allowed to get assistance and aid at that place. But I also, if you want to do it on your own and that's your thing and you've got nobody who's into that, most trail runs, and they talk about it, right? The aid stations are epic, right? Like they're not like road. You go to a road and you get to the aid station, you've got water, electrolytes, and maybe there's some goose or whatever. Man, you show up at a good trail running race aid station, you got PB&J, you got chocolates, you got pickles, salt. Depending upon the size of magnitude, you can have all kinds of stuff. And the last one I did, the Ray Miller, that's a pretty big race. It's probably I want to say it's about 400 or 450 people race. There's 3 distances. Okay. You show up at those aid stations, they know it's a drop bag station. You come in, they see your number. They'll look at you. Do you have a drop bag? Yes, I do. They'll go get it for you. They'll hand it to you. They'll help you.
That's sweet.
If you something. It's a great community, so
really helpful people.
That's your question. The support, where do you get it? What I tell people is like, if you have no support, let's say you're just single, right? Like you're solo, you're on your own. Maybe like me, right? Like maybe you're running because you're trying to stay sober. You go out and train up and go to your first race. Go to a shorter trail race. As I tell people, like, don't feel like you got to wait a year to train up for a 50K to go to experience the trail running. There are 25Ks. There's half marathons, there's 10K trail runs. Get out and start running those races. Get out of your comfort zone. Hang out after the race. Chat with people. You'll meet people. Who have running groups, Discord channels. Before you know it, you'll have friends that'll just like do anything for you at any race.
Yeah, that's great advice. Mike, I'm curious too, did you ever pace somebody for a longer distance before you did that distance? For like a 50 miler, for example, or your 100K, did you pace those for someone before you did them yourself, or did you just hop right into it?
No. And I offered to pace somebody one time. I've had one pacing opportunity. I've done more of what I've done. I've done tons of volunteering on trails. So I do lots of aid station work, directional work. Nice. But a friend of mine was doing, the Kodiak 100 miler here in Big Bear, California. Okay. And I basically I had not paced yet. And pacing it was a little intimidating, right? And why it's intimidating is, you wonder, am I going to do the right thing for that person when they're there? Because typically when you pace somebody, you're picking them up at least at the earliest around half of the race distance. So if it's a 50 miler, you're probably picking them up between 23, right? Let's just call it 25 miles, 25 to 30 miles. And usually that's kind of how it works. You're picking somebody up on the back half of the race.
Interesting.
I was always intimidated, like, because I'm still new to this. Like I ran my first 50K in December of 2021. So what are we like? We're literally 2 years, right? 2 years ago, I ran my first ultra. And so I was like, am I going to do the right thing? Am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to be the right person that they need for motivation at that time? Am I going to run the right pace? Do I go in front? Do I go in the back? Like, what do I do? I was so nervous about it. And so when my friend had put out that she was going to run this 100-miler, and she's run a bunch, and she's kind of sort of taken more into hiking, and she's running this amazing company. It's Kira who runs for KH Races. I immediately texted her, and I was like, because I knew she would be a great teacher. She's been in the community for forever. And I knew the support group that she had. And I basically just said, hey, I'll do whatever if you need me to crew, but I would really love to pace you. So I never paced any of those distances. And I was intimidated. Now I'm a lot more comfortable. And then I kept trying to remember if it was before or after that. Like I just had my first pacer at this, my second 100K that I ran. It was kind of an interesting concept to me. And I think even asking somebody pace, I was also nervous. It's funny. Like I was nervous to be a pacer for all the reasons I described. And I was also nervous for them, because I was like, God, what if I get to this place where I'm too fast, I'm too slow, I'm too this, I'm too that. And then lo and behold, the first race I go to have a pacer, it was a triple loop course. So it's called the Cuyamaca 100K. And it's a Western States qualifier. And that's why I ran it. It was one of the last Western States qualifier in the Southwest. I'm like, I got to run this race. So I sign up. I asked my buddy Patrick to pace me. And it's 3 loops, a 50K loop, and then a 12-mile and an 18-mile. I came back after the first 50K loop. It was hotter than everybody expected that day. I bombed out, came back to life, and then I tripped and fell and cramped. And after the first loop, I was like, I'm done. I walk in, my buddy was going to pace me. Thank goodness he was early. So he could only pick me up for the last loop, but he showed up before I finished the first loop. And I show up, and I'm like, and he was there to crew me. So he's going to help me like that, and then wait for me to go do 12 more miles. So it's good. This is what it can be like. He shows up.
What a friend.
And then this is a true friend. I got 12 more miles to do. So I show up, and I'm like, I'm done. He's like, what do you mean you're done? Like, he's like, and he started playing the mind games with me. He's like, I didn't drive all this way to pace you for you to quit. Like, so he knew psychologically what he needed to do. And so he and a couple other friends who were there, they got me salted up. They got me squared up away. And so this is kind of back to that support group. It's just, you never know. And I've had races where I didn't really need anybody, but if I didn't have them that day, I would not have finished that race. So he pushed me out to go finish my second loop, and then waited for me to do a very slow 12-mile loop before he could actually come out on the course with me for the last 18. I come back at the second loop, and I same thing to him again. I said, hey, I'm done. Like I was just not going well for me. And he's like, no, you're not. He's like, I did not come all this way. What do you need? Let's get you in. Like, and he gets me out. I go, dude, I don't even think I'm going to make the cutoff. He's like, that's okay. He goes, if they pull you from the course, that's a whole different story than you quitting on yourself. Now we'll just go walk. He goes, let's just go hike. And we started hiking. And I'll be honest, this is where you've probably seen some funny memes online. We're clocking 15 and a half minute miles. We are not setting any land speed records. And he's just, and it's getting dark, night's coming in. He's like, it's fine. We're going to keep going. And this is my second 100K. So this is funny. Earlier, I told you the second one's easier.
Yeah.
Not always.
This one.
No. And so 18-mile loop with two aid stations, one at mile 6, one at mile 12, and then you come back to the finish. He's like, look, we're just going aid station. We just got 6 miles to go to the next aid station. We'll take it smooth. Let's take it easy, whatever pace you want. We jogged a little bit, but mostly it was pretty easy. And I got to a point where I'm like, I'm going to finish the cutoff. It was 19 hours was the cutoff for the race. I got to a point, my spirits started to get lifted where I'm like, all right, I'm going to make the race cutoff.
Yeah.
And then it got to a point where I was like, the Western States cutoff was 17 hours. It was 2 hours faster than the race cutoff.
Okay.
Then I got like the last 6 miles. I started to get to this place where I'm like, oh, wow, I could possibly make the cutoff for Western States qualifying. We hit a turn, and at this turn, it's the last mile, and there's a yellow sign up with an arrow, and it says 1 mile to go. And I asked my buddy Patrick, I go, what time is it? And he says it's 11. What did he say? It's 11:16, and the cutoff would have been 11:30 because we started at 6:30. And in my head, I'm good with math. I mentally go, that's 14 minutes. We've been clocking 15 and a half minutes, literally for the last 15 miles. I'm like, this isn't going to cut it, but I am damn close. And I don't know where it came from. I literally started jogging, and it took him a second to realize that I had done the math. We finished that last mile in like 11 minutes and 19 seconds. So I qualified for Western States with like 3 minutes to spare.
Dang.
And if I didn't have the support that day of him, Patrick there pushing me, I was going to quit.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it's a story now that I have to tell myself that even though it wasn't the result time-wise that I was hoping to get that day, it was a testament to, with support and surrounding yourself with the right people, what you can push and persevere through. Now, I only had one ticket for Western States. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's a tough race to get into.
In fact, I watched a video on it yesterday. It looks awesome.
Oh, you did? Yeah. It's a great race. And so now I have a ticket now. When I qualify next year, I can go in again. Then I'll have 2 tickets because they let your tickets roll, and then they kind of multiply in a sense. So you get it's something like 1 to the n minus 1 or something like that. So if you've qualified 3 years in a row, you get I think there's 1 ticket, 2 tickets, 4 tickets, 8 tickets, 16. So like if you keep qualifying, it grows. And there are people who they just keep going, and it'll take them 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 9 years to get in. Because the only other way to get in is to go like win a race somewhere. You have to win a certain race. So
this is Western States 100.
Yeah. So the Western States Endurance Run, it's 100 miles. It's in Northern California. It's a point-to-point from I think it's from Olympia National Park into the town of Auburn. And it's like 16,000 feet of climbing, or 16 or 18.
Yeah.
But it's the oldest 100-mile race in existence today.
Okay.
It started in I want to say 74.
70? Okay.
I think it was 74. So I think the JFK 50 mile is the oldest ultra marathon, because I forget when that started, but that started before that one. But the Western States, it's only one distance. It's just the 100 miles, and it's the oldest. And it's also it's funny for the permitting. So a lot of people don't realize is most of these races, they happen on, public lands, whether it's state parks, national parks. So the permitting can be a little bit of a pain, and your permitting typically tells you how many people you can have. So I think Western States is capped at 360 people for their permits. That's it. That's all they
super
can have.
low.
Yeah. So even if they wanted to make, and it is literally the most storied, it is the mecca of all meccas, races. And, and so I think they do 100 of the tickets for the 360 go to sponsors and people who win there's certain races that if you win this race or come in first, second, or third, you get a guaranteed entrance. And then they raffle off 260. And I think this year there were over 9,000 entrants, and there were over 54,000 tickets. So see, this is what any of your listeners who are thinking about getting into the community, this is the buzz that, that people, it's you have any tattoos? So I have a few tattoos. I liken ultra running to tattoos. And what do I mean by that? I know a bunch of people who in college, they got one tattoo. Yeah. And kind of were, it was all right. Or it was even ugly. It was the stupidest tattoo they ever got. And they never got another one. Yeah. And then there's your tattoo people. They get one and they love that one, and then they get
Yeah.
second, and third, and
I
fourth.
see where
I
you're
think
going.
that's kind of how ultra running is. So it's like you either go and you do one and you just like, oh God, that was, and you never do it again. But or you're one of those, you start going to the next one. You get hooked, you get addicted, and look, there's way worse things, in my opinion, that we could spend our time doing, right? Like like one of the
Agreed.
things you like, you wanted to be outside, right? You want to get out to nature and see what the world has to offer.
It's funny you say that. Most of our listeners will probably have already listened to an episode with a buddy of mine named Miles, and he said, all we are as runners is a bunch of addicts. But addicts to to what the endorphins that running gives you, or whatever else running gives you. But we're addicted to it. But definitely worse things that you could be addicted to.
Yeah, and honestly, you will find is, we're saying to your listeners is like, look, go sign up for a 10K trail run. Like if you've, and I say a lot of people, and I see a lot of people. I'm a mentor for a trail running group, which is we typically train. It's usually like a 12-week training program that we train for. We pick a race that has multiple distances, and it's usually got a 10K to a 50K and a couple of distances in between. And we have everything from, there are people training to run their first 10K, and they like being outdoors, and they're hikers, so they want to go and do it on the trail rather than go do the turkey trot. To some people have run trails before, but this will be their first 50K. And then we have some people who maybe run a 50K or a couple marathons, and they're trying to get into the trail or just like improve their performance. And so, like I say to your listeners, even if you're like a runner, let's say you've run a half marathon or something like that before, but you've done mostly sort of road or stuff, go find a trail. If you're at all interested, if you're curious at all, we'll call it ultra curious, right? There's sober curious. If you're ultra curious, go find a trail race locally. There are plenty of them around. The race directors are all phenomenal. They all run great races, and go run one, and go run a 10K. Run what you're comfortable, right? Run a half marathon. Like I think sometimes a lot of people tend to think that trail running is ultra running. And they overlap, and those communities are together, which is wonderful because it just makes the community bigger and just more like lively and colorful. But you don't have to be an ultra runner to be a trail runner. And if that's not your jam, we just want good, fun people to come out and enjoy, what the mountains like, at least out here with them. And too, like, so I got some friends back east. They're like, what do you mean mountains?
Mountains.
So,
what is a mountain?
I highly encourage you, go try it out and find a group, find a group and go run and go do some training, or just, like I said, just go run a 10K and you'll meet cool people.
Totally, Mike. This has been an amazing episode. Such awesome stories. Thank you for all of your advice today, and especially everything revolving around support and what keeps us running. We are addicts, but you know what? It's a great thing to be addicted to. And maybe you aren't an addict yet. Maybe you just started this and you're like, it doesn't feel addicting yet. I hate this actually, or this is really hard. You can get there. Whatever your reason is for starting to run, just keep it going, and your reasons will change. We talk about that a lot on this podcast, your why, and that'll evolve over time, and that's a beautiful thing. So I just want to thank you, Mike, and thank you, listeners, for being here, and just keep on keeping on. Just keep going. Journey before destination.
Absolutely. Enjoy that journey.
Enjoy the journey. Thanks again, Mike. I'm curious if do you have any social media things or other businesses or websites you'd like folks to check out to keep up with you and follow you?
Yeah, so I'm on TikTok and Instagram and Strava, and people can find me. It's I'm MDG Runner, MDIGI Runner, at all three of those. And then also, Mike DiGiovanni on LinkedIn. I know that's kind of how we connected. I'm very active on LinkedIn and translating what I do in the running world to the business community. and by all means, I'll shoot the contact to you. You can put it in the show notes if you like. So if people want to connect with me more, I love talking running. I love talking, mindset, motivation, why you're doing what you're doing and how to break through that lack of motivation to get to that, that next step. And, I'll leave with this thought too, is like the other beautiful thing about trail running, you run at your own pace. Nobody's cares how fast or how slow you're going. It's just about being out on the trail and enjoying the fresh, clean air and making the most of what this world has to offer.
I love it, Mike. Well, thanks again. Thanks again for being
Awesome.
here, for your time, and we'll definitely share that out with the folks. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Brendan here. I just wanted to thank you for listening to today's episode. As someone new to ultra running myself, I found these conversations to be super valuable, and I hope they are for you as well. And if you want to know when the next podcast episode comes out, make sure you subscribe to the show. Also, some exciting news. The Ordinary to Ultra Facebook group is live. This is a great place to meet other aspiring, new, and experienced ultra runners and have any questions you have answered, get some advice, maybe find a running buddy that's local or maybe virtual. And it's just a great place to make connections with other psychos that like to run way too much. The link is in the description of this episode if you want to go join that Facebook group and make some awesome connections. And that is all. Thanks again for joining me today, and we'll catch you in the next episode.